Okay.
Good afternoon. I've been asked to talk about student success and a learning organization. I regret very much that I can't be with you today. This is important to me, and I wanted to have an opportunity to offer a few comments about student success. I also understand that part of what you're going to be dealing with today is related to student-centeredness. But they're both, I think, of interest, and I think there's a connection between the two. I guess this is all in the context of a learning organization, which is Thomas Nelson Community College. But let me step away for a minute and talk about student-centeredness, something which a number of colleges and universities began focusing on more than a decade ago. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense to be student-centered, to pay attention to how the various parts of the institution can support student success. And this comes at a good time for us because we're in the process of updating, revising our strategic plan. But in the last 10 or 15 years, as colleges and universities have begun paying more attention to ways to create a student-centered environment, it's caused all of us to step back and think critically about what that really means. What contributes to student success? How do we create a student-centered environment? And obviously, once you decide that this is the goal of Thomas Nelson, then we begin looking at ways to operationalize what we mean by student-centeredness. What do we mean by student success? What are the factors that contribute to student success? What are the issues that get in the way of student success? And having been at this institution for about 15 months, I must say that I've got some thoughts about that. And I hope that what I have to say is provocative and will stimulate your thinking as leaders of the college about ways that we can be more focused in our efforts. I think first and foremost, we must get the attention of our faculty. We must look at ways that contribute to student success from the standpoint of instruction. And that increasingly, I think, causes us to think about instructional methods, and technology obviously has to be a very big part of that conversation. We have at Thomas Nelson an underutilization of technology for instruction, something that I know Norm Hahn is working on in consultation with the deans and the faculty. And so we must look for ways to increase the uses of technology for instruction, but we must also ensure that as we utilize technology for instruction more, that it is indeed meeting the needs of our students and not simply going through the motions with distance learning. How effective is technology for instruction for all kinds of courses? It may be more effective for certain areas or certain programs or certain courses than it is for others. What are we going to do to ensure that we adequately prepare faculty for the use of technology? We've got a number of faculty who are older, who are not comfortable with technology. We have students increasingly coming to us who are better prepared, more conversant, more more accepting of technology than a lot of our faculty. And so if we decide that in order to contribute to student success, we need to utilize technology for instruction more, we have to begin to look at where our faculty are and what we're going to do to better prepare them. It's for that reason that the person who's charged with faculty development reports to the Vice President for Academic Affairs. I'm referring to the person who's in charge of technology, who regarding faculty, who in the past reported to the Vice President for Information Technology and the Vice President for Academic Affairs. It's important to have that connection, and we've got to spend, I think, more resources getting our faculty prepared. Another area that I think needs to be operationalized with regard to creating more student-centered environment is what goes on in student affairs or student development. And I must admit that I'm still learning a lot about that organization, because my experience in a four-year institution has taught me some things about recruitment, marketing, academic support that is somewhat different on a community college campus. I don't know that because it's different that it's less effective, but it's a different paradigm, and it's something that I'm still trying to get my arms around. But I do think that there are some things that we can borrow and learn from comprehensive four-year institutions with regard to student affairs, student development. And I'll just give you one example. And again, as we grapple with ways to create a more student-centered environment at Thomas Nelson, I hope this will be instructive. But community colleges admit a broad swath of students, some of whom are academically prepared, some of whom are not well prepared for the rigors of academic study. And because it is so highly variable, we need to be thinking very, very carefully about the platform at which everybody is supposed to start, so that they're getting the attention that they need in order to do well in the classes that, or the courses that are part of their curriculum. In a four-year institution, if a student is admitted who demonstrates that he or she needs some remediation, the R word is anathema in colleges and universities, four-year colleges and universities, but there is often a need for some remedial instruction. But if a student is identified through some metric that he or she needs some additional help, it makes sense to create some kind of academic safety net to ensure that if they are having difficulty, they can get prepared, get caught up, and get on with their instruction. We need to think very, very carefully about whether those that we are admitting and when we admit them are ready to take the courses that are required for their course of study. And again, that's something that will need to be operationalized in consultation with academic affairs and student affairs. Two separate units here, I know. In some other colleges, speaking of community colleges, they're under a single umbrella, but a decision was made to separate them at this institution, and for reasons that were sound, I'm sure. I was not here at the time. But I'd like to see us work a little bit more closely together. That is, the academic affairs unit and the student services, student affairs area at Thomas Nelson. I don't see as much of a connection as I think is necessary in order to achieve the kind of student-centered learning environment that we purport to want. And I know Norm Hahn has offered to meet with the major divisions of each of the areas at Thomas Nelson since he assumed his duties on an interim basis. I don't know if he has in fact spent any time talking to the Student Affairs Division. If that has not occurred, it should occur. I'll even go so far as to use a four-letter word and say it must occur. Because in order to achieve what we purport to want to achieve, which is an enhanced student-centered learning environment, there needs to be closer cooperation, a close working relationship between what goes on in our classroom formally and what goes on outside of our classroom. There is, I think, a very strong argument that can be made for co-curricular activities, and a lot of those co-curricular activities that are oftentimes related to instruction occur outside of the classroom and under the general rubric of student affairs, student development. Those folks need to be talking to each other. We've launched, as I think you all know, a process reengineering project led by Mr. Alexander Green, something which I pushed for and which got launched before Catherine Spendor left. I understand that there was some kind of reengineering going on before I got here, and I'm not trying to claim credit or sound as though nothing was going on before I arrived. There was something going on. I could never quite get my arms around it or fully understand what it was. But I can tell you, again, just based on my limited experience of the last 15 or 16 months, we don't have a smooth process for getting students in to the college, ensuring that they get into the right courses, ensuring that they get the proper advising and so on. Much of what we're talking about here is really just basic stuff, executing the fundamentals. It should be an easy, seamless process to get a student in, get them registered, package their financial aid, get them in the courses that they need. So again, these highfalutin sounding terms like student-centeredness and a learning environment, that's great, but it all begins with our ability to execute the fundamentals. And so what I've talked about, again, having some clarity about what it is we're trying to achieve, how do we operationalize those, both from an academic affairs perspective, but also from a student affairs, student development perspective, and ensuring that those two areas work well together. I'd like now to turn to a third, more general issue which undergirds, I think, the prior two, and that is customer service. And what do we mean by customer service? Again, this is something that I've become increasingly concerned about in the brief time that I've been here. And it is an issue that pervades the college. It's not just a student affairs issue. It's not just an academic affairs issue. It's a business and finance issue. It's an institutional advancement issue. It's a technology issue, and I could name a customer service issue for every one of those major divisions that I just cited. We can take institutional advancement. Well, where's the customer service issue there? Well, we are a college that knows that we must do a whole lot more to garner both public funds and private dollars. The prospect of getting more public funds, as I've said before, I think is not good. We do have some room, I think, to expand our ability to garner more private funds. and our alumni represents one potential base of support. Well, a good customer service program begins with having a sound database, knowing who our alumni are, how we can access them, and having a regular means of communicating with them. On the business and finance side, lots of customer service issues, ranging from making sure the grounds are clean, making sure that things like bathrooms are clean, making sure that if someone calls financial aid, their phone call is returned, and if they're on campus, making sure that they get immediate attention and that their problems get resolved and not passed off to someone else. I could go on. Obviously, there are a number in student affairs and academic affairs, the way faculty relate to students. You have students who are not just traditional age, but we've got adult students, so you don't talk to an adult who's 44 years old who's in the Coast Guard the way you talk to an 18-year-old who's starting college for the first time. Students have many options, and they vote with their feet, and so if they don't like what we're putting down, they can go find what they're looking for someplace else. And it's an increasingly competitive environment, and if we don't understand that as a basic issue regarding creating student success, we're not going to get where I think we'd like to be. And so customer service is something which is all encompassing. It is something which I plan to address in a more direct way later this spring. I've appointed a task force on customer service. It will be chaired by Dr. Deborah Wright, and we've identified some persons who are going to do the training. We'll have a summit later this spring. We can find a date, and we'll talk about how Thomas Nelson can be more effective in its customer service effort, something which is very important to us. And I must tell you, again, just based on my limited experience, we've got lots of room for improvement. I'm trying to put this as positively as I know how. But everybody has to be involved in it. I'm a person who insists that when somebody calls this office, we answer the phone on, if not the first ring, the second, but certainly not more than 3 rings. Very important. People are calling for a reason, and when they call, we must have answers for them and not send them to somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody else. We should have certain basic information about the college at our fingertips. These things contribute enormously to student success, because if they've got a problem, they need to go where they know they'll get an answer that is going to address their concerns and not get shunted off to this person and then another person and maybe someone else. And these things, regrettably, just don't happen willy-nilly. I mean, somebody has to orchestrate, somebody has to set standards, somebody has to have expectations that this is what we mean by customer service. And when you call Thomas Nelson, when you visit Thomas Nelson, when you take courses at Thomas Nelson, you can be assured you're going to get the very highest level of service possible, because that is a part of who we are. And if we'd like to be known as an institution that delivers, we'd like to be known as an institution that delivers positive results for our students, for our alumni, for our various stakeholders. And that is what we should be doing, but we don't talk about it enough. So again, this idea of creating a student-centered environment is multifaceted. It's not just a matter of what goes on in the classroom. It's not just a matter of what goes on in certain offices that we think of as service offices, like business or financial aid or Veterans Affairs. And all of those are very important. But it really is pervasive, all-encompassing. It's about how every facet of Thomas Nelson Community College can work together to ensure that when a student enrolls at Thomas Nelson, irrespective of age, gender, race, prior academic accomplishments, that we're poised, we're ready to meet them where they are, to equip them with what they need in order to successfully navigate this institution for whatever period they are here. And if we don't pay attention to those fundamentals, and if we don't execute those fundamentals well, as I've said before, people vote with their feet, which means that they'll find another place to get what they're looking for. I'll make one other comment, because I've talked in rather traditional terms, but a big part of what Thomas Nelson has to do with workforce development, and that is how well we relate and serve our clients who are in our designated service areas. And so, from the standpoint of workforce development, I'll share with you something that I've mentioned before and may have mentioned to you previously, I'm not sure. Well, about 3 months after I arrived, I had a visit by 4 area fire chiefs. The fire chief of Hampton, who's now an assistant city manager, the fire chief of Newport News, the fire chief of Poquoson and York. And they came to meet with me because they were concerned that over the years they had observed that Thomas Nelson was no longer delivering instruction for their staff, who number about 1,000. Think about it, 1,000 potential students who at one time were able to take courses at Thomas Nelson, but because we had failed to pay attention, these women and men were now taking courses that they need in order to maintain certification ratings or in order to advance to another level in the organization. They were now taking these courses at Tidewater Community College. Well, that's something that should not have happened, and we should ensure that that does not happen again. They're in our service area, which means that we exist to meet and serve their needs, and if we aren't, then we're failing to do what we are supposed to do. Put that in the context of creating a student-centered learning environment. These are students. We're not meeting their needs. We were not meeting their needs on the most fundamental level. And that is something that should never happen. And that probably means that we need to do a better job of just staying in touch with our potential students and clients. We need to do a better job of knowing what their needs are and being poised and prepared to meet those needs. I hear from time to time concerns about Tidewater Community College making incursions on our turf. Well, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, that won't happen. If we're listening to what the clients and stakeholders in our service areas need and expect from us, and we're satisfying those expectations, we needn't worry about Tidewater Community College or St. Leo's or Strayer or anybody else for that matter. And that is the kind of learning environment that is focused on the student and student success that has to be a part of this conversation from a workforce development perspective. So understanding who we are designed to serve, and figuring out in a thoughtful, constructive way how we work together to meet those needs is something that is all a part of this conversation. I'll end by saying that just recently I asked that the vice presidents representing technology, workforce development, finance and business, and academic affairs, student affairs, sit down and talk about how we can eliminate the silos, how we eliminate the barriers so that we're clear about the folk in business understanding that they need to fully recognize what goes on in workforce development so that they can better meet their needs. And I've asked that these women and men who represent these areas sit down and begin that kind of conversation, because I don't think that we fully recognize always how what goes on in Dr. Wright's sandbox is affected by what does or does not occur in Mr. Nurnberger's sandbox. And we need to be sure that not just the vice presidents, but the individuals at mid-level and below fully understand the importance of knowing how what they do may affect positively or negatively. And of course, we want to eliminate or reduce the negatives as much as we can. But in order to do even that, we need to have a better understanding of how what goes on in one area has implications for another. I hope this has been helpful to you. Again, I regret that I couldn't be with you this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.